The village had never seen a day like this before. The air buzzed with an electric energy, yet there was an undercurrent of tension that nobody could ignore. It was the day of Sarah's wedding. People from all over the village gathered at the church, dressed in their finest clothes, chattering in excited whispers, eagerly awaiting the ceremony. It should have been a celebration, a joyful occasion to mark the start of a new chapter. But there was something that had everyone on edge. No one could quite explain it, but something felt off. At the center of the crowd, Sarah stood at the altar, her white dress shimmering under the warm afternoon sunlight that streamed through the stained glass windows. She looked every bit the picture of happiness. Her smile was radiant, her eyes sparkling as she gazed at her fiancé, Tom. Tom stood tall and proud beside her, grinning from ear to ear, oblivious to the weight of the eyes that watched them. But there was something more beneath that smile, a nervous twitch of her fingers as she gripped Tom's hand tightly, as if afraid it would slip away. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, but her eyes, they were distant. And anyone who knew Sarah well enough could tell that something was wrong. She had been with every man in the village, after all. The whispers had started years ago, behind closed doors, in the shadows. At first, they were nothing but rumors, stories exchanged in hushed tones at the market, or over a drink at the pub. But the rumors grew. They grew to a point where no one could ignore them anymore. They became the truth in the eyes of the villagers. The truth that Sarah had been involved with every man in the village. One by one, each man had his turn with her, and no one knew exactly what it meant. They all claimed that it had been different with Sarah, that she was special, that their time together had meant something. But no one really knew what to make of it. No one knew why it had happened, why Sarah had chosen to be with them all. No one except Sarah. And now, today, Sarah stood at the altar, a woman of contradictions. The whispers and gossip of the village seemed to have reached their peak, but she had no choice but to continue, to stand here, on this day, in front of everyone. She had chosen to marry Tom. She had chosen this moment, this life, but the question on everyone's mind was the same: why? Why had she chosen Tom, when her past was so tangled, so confusing? Why had she walked away from every other man who had crossed her path, and what made Tom so special? The village had their theories. Some thought she was looking for stability after years of emotional chaos. Others believed it was love, that she had finally found the one person who truly understood her. But nobody truly knew. And Sarah wasn't telling. The ceremony had begun, the priest's voice echoing through the church as he recited the vows. The crowd fell into a hushed silence. Each person waiting for the moment when Sarah and Tom would exchange their vows. The words were meant to signify commitment, to mark the beginning of a life together, but for Sarah, it felt like something else. Something heavy. Her hand trembled as she held Tom's, and she clenched her jaw, as if fighting back a wave of emotion that threatened to spill out. The longer she stood there, the more disconnected she felt from the moment. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but all she could feel was a gnawing emptiness. She had made it this far, standing before everyone who had once whispered about her. She had survived it all, the rumors, the gossip, the stares. But here, in this moment, the weight of it all came crashing down on her. And then it happened. As Sarah stood there, her eyes scanning the crowd, her gaze suddenly froze. It was as if the world had stopped for a heartbeat. Her pupils dilated, her chest tightened, and she couldn't breathe for a second. She had locked eyes with someone in the back of the church. A face. A face she hadn't expected to see. It was a man. A man from her past. A man who had never been mentioned in any of the village's rumors. A man who had disappeared from her life years ago. For a split second, time seemed to stretch and bend. The world around her blurred, and all she could focus on was that one face, staring back at her. The air felt thick, and the silence in the room seemed to deepen. Every breath felt like it was too loud. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. The man's eyes were locked on hers, intense and unwavering, and something in them sent a chill down her spine. Her grip on Tom's hand tightened, her knuckles turning white, but Tom didn't notice. He was too caught up in the ceremony, too busy focusing on the priest's words. But Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away. The man in the back of the room hadn't changed. He still had that same look, mysterious, calculating, and somehow, full of regret. It was as if he was a ghost from her past, a figure who had come back to haunt her on the most important day of her life. What was he doing here? Why had he shown up now, of all times? And why did she feel like something was about to happen? The priest's voice seemed to fade into the background as Sarah's mind raced. Her thoughts were a blur, a whirlwind of memories and emotions. There had been so many men, so many faces, so many nights spent in fleeting moments of passion or confusion. But this one man, had been different. He had been the one she never quite understood, the one who had gotten under her skin in ways she hadn't been able to explain. He was the one she couldn't forget, no matter how hard she tried. Her heart pounded faster, and for the first time that day, she felt dizzy. The man had disappeared from her life years ago, but now he was back. And he was standing there, watching her, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The priest's words became a distant hum, a blur in her ears. The crowd around her was still, but Sarah could feel the weight of their gazes, their unspoken questions. The questions that had followed her everywhere. Why had she done it? Why had she been with so many men? What was she hiding? But it wasn't just the villagers' questions that haunted her now. It was the questions in her own mind. The questions that had been buried, locked away deep in her heart. What had happened to her? What had led her to this moment? What was she running from? And why was he here? The wedding bells rang, but Sarah barely heard them. She barely even felt Tom's hand in hers. She was too lost in the sudden whirlwind of emotions, too consumed by the man in the back of the room. Tom turned to her, smiling that easy, trusting smile, unaware of the storm that was brewing inside her. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to return the smile. Instead, she glanced at the man again, just for a second, and then quickly looked away. The ceremony continued, but in Sarah's mind, time had stopped. She was stuck, trapped between the past and the present. Between the man she had chosen to marry and the man who had haunted her for years. The priest finished the vows, but Sarah's thoughts were elsewhere. Her heart raced, and her breath came in shallow gasps. She couldn't focus. She couldn't think. All she could see was that face. All she could hear was the deafening silence in her mind. And then, just as quickly as the moment had come, the man disappeared into the crowd. He was gone. Vanished. But the damage had already been done. Tom kissed her, sealing their vows. But the kiss felt hollow. Empty. Something had changed. Something had shifted. And as they walked down the aisle, hand in hand, the villagers cheered, oblivious to the storm raging inside Sarah. The questions would linger, the whispers would continue, but Sarah knew something none of them did. Her story was far from over. The wedding reception was in full swing. The hall was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the soft murmur of conversations. Yet amidst the celebration, Sarah felt a distance between herself and everyone else. The music played on, but it felt like background noise to her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something had been set into motion that she couldn't control. Her new husband, Tom, beamed with happiness beside her. He was in his element, the center of attention as friends and family gathered around him, congratulating him and offering well wishes. Tom was everything Sarah had ever thought she wanted, steady, reliable, and kind. But there was a nagging feeling in her chest that she couldn't ignore. She couldn't stop thinking about the man in the back of the church. His eyes. That intense gaze. She felt it even now, like an invisible weight pressing down on her. He hadn't spoken to her. He hadn't even moved toward her. But his presence had been enough to throw her entire world off balance. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself retreating to a quieter corner of the hall. She needed space, time to think, to breathe. The laughter and chatter seemed to grow louder, more oppressive, the longer she stayed surrounded by the crowd. She needed a break from it all, from the questions that were creeping into her mind. She stepped out onto the balcony, hoping the cool night air would calm her. She leaned against the railing, her eyes tracing the path of the moon as it hung high above the village. It was peaceful out here, away from the noise, away from the eyes of everyone who had gathered to witness her wedding. But no matter how far she tried to distance herself from it all, the same question lingered in her mind. Why had he shown up? Why had he come back now, of all times? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She had felt his presence before he even spoke. Sarah, Tom's voice broke through her reverie. Everything okay? She turned to face him, forcing a smile. Yeah, just needed some air. Tom studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing with concern. He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and comforting. You've been distant all day. If something's bothering you, you can talk to me. Sarah swallowed hard. She wanted to tell him. She wanted to spill everything, the truth, the confusion, the fear. But she couldn't. Not yet. She wasn't ready. I'm fine, Tom, she said softly, squeezing his hand. I'm just tired. It's been a long day. Tom nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. All right. But if you need to talk, I'm here. She nodded in return, but her mind was still miles away. She couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was lurking, just beyond her reach. That man from the church, his eyes, something wasn't right. She could feel it deep in her bones. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself growing more restless. The party seemed to drag on, the music growing louder, the people around her more animated, but none of it mattered. Her thoughts kept returning to that moment in the church. The way the man had looked at her. The way everything had felt so wrong. By the time the guests began to trickle out of the reception, Sarah had barely spoken to anyone. Tom had been caught up in conversations with old friends, but Sarah remained a silent observer, her mind far from the celebrations. It was only when the last of the guests had left, and the hall had fallen into silence, that she allowed herself to let out the breath she'd been holding. She and Tom were alone now, and yet, even in the privacy of their own home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Tom reached over to kiss her on the cheek, his lips warm against her skin. Are you sure you're okay? He asked again, his voice filled with concern. I'm fine, Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Just tired. Tom smiled and pulled her into a gentle embrace. You're my wife now, Sarah. I'll take care of you. Whatever's bothering you, we'll get through it together. Sarah closed her eyes, leaning into him, but even as his arms held her close, her mind was far from comforted. She couldn't stop thinking about that man. She couldn't stop thinking about the things he might know. The things she hadn't told anyone. The things she had buried deep inside her. It wasn't just the fact that he had shown up at her wedding. It was the way he had looked at her, like he knew something no one else did. It was the sense of recognition in his eyes, as if they shared some dark, twisted history that she couldn't even remember. What did he want? Why had he come back after all these years? And why had he come now, of all times? The questions gnawed at her, keeping her awake long after Tom had fallen asleep beside her. She tossed and turned in bed, unable to shake the feeling that something was coming. Something she wasn't ready for. The next morning. Sarah awoke the next morning with a sense of dread hanging over her. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room, but she couldn't shake the coldness in her chest. The man from the wedding was still on her mind, his image burned into her memory. She couldn't let go of the feeling that his presence meant something dangerous. Tom stirred beside her, stretching and yawning. Morning, beautiful, he said, his voice groggy but warm. Sarah forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Morning. Tom smiled and leaned in to kiss her, but Sarah pulled back slightly, just enough to avoid the touch. She didn't want him to see the worry that clouded her thoughts. She didn't want him to know that she was struggling with something she couldn't explain. "Sarah," Tom said gently, his voice filled with concern. "Talk to me. You've been distant all morning. I don't know what's going on, but if something's wrong, you can't keep it inside. You've got to tell me." The warmth in his voice almost broke her. Almost. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not when the past was still hanging over her, threatening to swallow her whole. "I'm fine, Tom," she repeated, her voice flat. But deep down, Sarah knew she wasn't fine. She wasn't fine at all. As the day passed, the unease that had gripped Sarah's heart only grew stronger. She couldn't focus on anything. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Every sound seemed to echo in her mind, reminding her of the man she had seen at the church, and the questions he had brought back with him. Later that afternoon, Sarah decided she needed to go into town. She needed to do something, anything, to take her mind off the chaos swirling inside her. Tom was busy with work, and Sarah had no intention of telling him where she was going. She didn't need to explain herself. Not yet. As she walked down the familiar streets of the village, the sun shining brightly above her, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the man lurking in the shadows, but every time she turned around, there was nothing. Just the quiet streets, the rustling of leaves in the wind. She passed by the old bakery, the pub where she had shared so many nights with friends, and then she turned down a narrow alleyway, one she had walked down countless times. But today, the alley seemed different. Darker. And in the distance, she saw someone standing near the end of the alley, waiting. Her heart skipped a beat. It was him. The man from the church. The man's figure loomed in the dimly lit alley, his back turned toward Sarah. She could feel her heart hammering against her chest as if it were trying to break free. It was him. The same man from her wedding. The one whose gaze had followed her throughout the ceremony, as though he knew something no one else did. And now, here he was, standing in front of her. Sarah's feet felt like they were frozen in place, but she couldn't move. The alley was narrow, silent except for the faint rustling of leaves and the distant sound of cars passing by. It was just her and him. Her mind raced, her thoughts jumbled and scattered, but one question stood out: why is he here? He slowly turned toward her, and Sarah instinctively took a step back, her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't make out his features clearly, but there was a coldness in his eyes that sent a chill through her body. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't saying anything. He just stood there, watching her. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost distant, like a ghost from the past. "I knew you'd be here," he said, his words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. "I knew you wouldn't be able to resist." Sarah's stomach twisted into a knot. What did he mean? How did he know she'd be here? And why was he speaking to her like this, like they shared some sort of unspoken history? She took another step back, her hand instinctively moving toward her purse. She wasn't sure why she felt the need to protect herself, but her instinct screamed at her to be cautious. "Who are you?" Sarah finally asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to stay calm. The man's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a kind smile. It was as if he found amusement in her fear. "You know who I am," he replied, his voice almost mocking. "I'm the one you've been running from." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Running from? She didn't understand. She had never seen him before today, not in years. The last time she remembered encountering him was, years ago. But how could he possibly know that she had been running? Running from what? From him? "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, her voice rising with panic. "I don't know you. I don't know what you want from me." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "You will," he said softly, almost as if he were whispering a secret meant only for her. "You will understand soon enough." Every muscle in Sarah's body screamed at her to run, to get away from him. But she couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, unable to tear her eyes away from his. Something about the way he looked at her made it impossible to look away. It was as if he were pulling her into his web, piece by piece. Then, suddenly, he took another step closer. "You don't remember me, do you?" Sarah shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. The words felt like a weight on her chest, suffocating her. Her mind raced, desperately searching for any memory that would make sense of this situation. But there was nothing. She couldn't remember him. "You will remember," he said, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "Eventually. The truth always comes out, Sarah." Before she could respond, he turned and began walking away, his steps echoing through the alley. Sarah stood frozen, her heart still pounding in her chest. She wanted to call out to him, demand answers, but something held her back. Her body was paralyzed by the fear, the uncertainty of what had just happened. For a moment, the alley felt impossibly quiet, too still. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. But then, just as quickly as it had started, the silence was shattered by a loud voice. "Sarah? Is everything okay?" She snapped out of her trance and turned toward the sound. It was Tom, standing at the entrance of the alley, his eyes filled with concern. She felt a surge of relief wash over her, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. Had he seen her talking to the man? Had he seen him? "Tom," Sarah called, her voice trembling as she stepped toward him. You won't believe what just happened." Tom's eyes darted around, scanning the alley. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice thick with worry. "Who were you talking to?" Sarah swallowed hard, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain the impossible? How could she tell him that the man she had just seen had been someone from her past, someone she couldn't even remember? "There was a man," Sarah said finally, her voice barely a whisper. He just showed up. He said I'd remember him. He said I'd been running from him." Tom frowned, clearly confused. "You're not making sense, Sarah. Who was he? What did he want?" "I don't know," she whispered, her throat tight. "I don't know who he is. But he knows me. He knows things about me. Things I don't remember." Tom stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're in shock. It's okay. Maybe you're just imagining things. That man, he's probably just some random person who—" "No," Sarah interrupted, shaking her head. "No, Tom. He wasn't a random person. I've seen him before. And he said I was running from him." Tom looked at her, his expression softening. "Sarah, you're scared, I understand. But you've been through a lot today. The wedding, the emotions. Maybe you're just overwhelmed." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was happening. She wasn't imagining things. This man was real. He had been there. And now, the thought of him being in her life again, after all these years, terrified her. "I need to go home," she said suddenly, her voice filled with urgency. "I need to figure out what's going on. I can't deal with this right now." Tom nodded, though his concern didn't leave his face. He led Sarah back to their car, his hand gently resting on her back. The drive home was quiet, but the weight of Sarah's thoughts hung heavily in the air. The man's words echoed in her mind, over and over again. "You will remember." When they arrived at the house, Sarah didn't hesitate. She went straight to the living room, sitting down on the couch. Her hands were shaking, her thoughts a jumbled mess of confusion and fear. Tom followed her inside but stood in the doorway, watching her closely. "Sarah, please, talk to me. What's going on?" "I can't explain it, Tom," she said, her voice breaking. "There's something from my past. Something I can't remember. And now this man is here, saying I've been running from him." Tom's face softened, but there was no understanding in his eyes. Only concern. We'll figure this out together, okay? Whatever it is, we'll get through it. But Sarah wasn't sure she believed him. The more she thought about it, the more uncertain she became. Something was out of her control. Something dark was creeping up from her past, and she wasn't ready to face it. She needed answers. And she was determined to get them, no matter what it took. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, the sound of the wind outside was the only thing she could focus on. But just as she was about to drift off to sleep, she heard it, the faint sound of footsteps outside. Someone was at the door. Someone who had been watching her. Her heart raced. Was it him again? Had he come back? Before she could move, a shadow appeared under the door. And then, a knock. The knock at the door echoed in the stillness of the night. It was a sound that sent a chill down Sarah's spine, her heart beating wildly in her chest. She could hardly believe it, after everything that had happened, after everything she had seen and heard, it was him again. The man from her past, the one whose presence had unsettled her to her core. How had he found her? Why was he here now? Sarah didn't move. She was paralyzed by fear. The knocking came again, louder this time, insistent. Her body was frozen, caught between wanting to run and the need to face whatever was waiting outside. Could she trust herself to open the door? Or was this just the beginning of something darker? Sarah, Tom's voice broke through the silence, calm but filled with concern. Who's there? I don't know, she whispered, barely able to form the words. But it's him. I'm sure of it. Tom's expression hardened, and he moved toward the door. Stay here, he said, his voice firm, before disappearing into the hallway. Sarah heard his footsteps fading as he reached the door. The knocking stopped for a moment, then resumed. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to hide, but something inside her told her that she couldn't. Not this time. A few moments later, she heard Tom's voice again, but this time it was different. It was strained, almost as if he were trying to control his emotions. Sarah, you need to come here, he called. Her pulse raced, and fear gripped her chest like a vice. She stood up slowly, her legs weak, and made her way to the doorway. As she approached, she felt a sudden surge of dread. Whatever was waiting outside that door, she wasn't prepared for it. When she reached the living room, she saw Tom standing in front of the door, his face pale and tense. He looked at her with a mix of confusion and something else, something darker. Who is it? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Tom didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped aside, allowing her to see for herself. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as her eyes fell on the figure standing on the other side of the door. It wasn't the man from the alley, not exactly. It was someone else, someone familiar but not quite the same. His face was older, weathered by time, but there was no mistaking him. It was her father. Dad? Sarah whispered, disbelief flooding her voice. What? What are you doing here? Her father's eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his gaze that suggested he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. His presence stirred memories that Sarah had buried deep within her. Memories she hadn't wanted to face. I need to talk to you, Sarah, her father said, his voice cold and distant. There's something you need to know. She stood there, frozen. Her mind raced, but no words came to her lips. It didn't make sense. The last time she had seen her father, it had been years ago, years of silence, years of separation. He had disappeared from her life when she was a teenager, leaving behind nothing but questions. And now, here he was, standing on her doorstep, claiming that there was something she needed to know. What do you want, Dad? Sarah finally managed to ask, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. Why are you here now? I didn't come for a reunion, her father replied, his tone blunt. I came because it's time you remember the truth. Time for you to understand what's been hidden from you all these years. Hidden? Sarah repeated, her heart racing. What are you talking about? Why didn't you tell me before? Her father's eyes softened slightly, but the coldness in his voice never wavered. There's a lot I never told you. Things I should have. But it's too late to go back now. You need to know the truth. Sarah's mind was spinning, her head throbbing with a sudden headache. The truth? What truth? What had he kept from her? And why now, after all these years of silence? What truth, she demanded, her voice rising. What could possibly be so important that you waited this long to tell me? Her father glanced around, as though ensuring they were alone. It's not just about you, Sarah. It's about everyone. Your past is tied to something bigger, something you don't understand yet. Sarah's frustration boiled over. Stop talking in riddles. I'm done with the games. Just tell me what's going on. I can't explain it all in one night, her father said quietly, his voice now tinged with regret. But you're going to have to trust me. Things are coming to a head. The man you saw tonight, the one from the wedding? He's not just some stranger. He's a part of this. What do you mean? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper now. How is he part of this? What does he have to do with me? Her father exhaled slowly, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He knows everything. He's been waiting for you to remember. But I'm afraid it's too late. He's already made his move. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine as she looked at him, trying to make sense of his words. Made his move? What does that even mean? Her father's gaze dropped to the ground, his shoulders slumping with the weight of something too heavy to bear. It means that what happened all those years ago is coming to light now. The past is catching up with us. It's not just about you anymore, Sarah. It's about everything. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah stood there, feeling the weight of his words sinking in. What was he talking about? What had happened all those years ago? And why had he kept her in the dark all this time? Why didn't you tell me? Sarah asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you ever come back? Why did you leave? Her father's eyes darkened, and he stepped closer, his voice barely audible. I left to protect you, Sarah. To keep you safe. There are people who wanted to hurt you. People who wanted to erase you from existence. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Erase you from existence? Who, she demanded. Who wanted to hurt me? Her father looked at her one last time, his expression filled with a sorrow she had never seen in him. I can't tell you. Not yet. But you need to trust me. We don't have much time. He turned to leave, but before he could walk away, Sarah grabbed his arm. Wait. Don't go. I don't understand. You're telling me there's something bigger than this? Something I'm missing? Her father hesitated, then turned back to face her. You'll find out soon enough. But for now, you need to get out of here. You need to disappear. Sarah's world seemed to spin around her, and she felt like she was losing control. Everything was happening so fast, and the more her father said, the less she understood. The truth. The past. People wanting to hurt her. Who were these people? And why did they want to erase her? Her father took one last look at her, his eyes filled with pain. Go, he said softly. Get as far away from here as you can. Trust me. The danger's real. Before Sarah could respond, he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving her standing there in the cold. She was left with more questions than answers. And the darkness was closing in. The chill in the air was suffocating, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the house that Sarah had once called her safe space. But nothing felt safe anymore. Not with the unknown lurking around every corner. Not after her father's cryptic warning and the mysterious text message that had just sent a fresh wave of panic through her. The message kept replaying in her mind, you should have listened to your father. It's too late now. The words felt like an accusation, a reminder that she was no longer in control of her own fate. Sarah tried to steady her breathing, but her heart kept racing, thumping wildly against her chest. The weight of the message settled over her, and every instinct screamed for her to run, to get as far away as possible. But where would she go? Who could she trust? Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. This time, the number was different, but the message was even more chilling. The clock is ticking. You can't escape what's coming. Her hands shook as she dropped the phone onto the kitchen counter. She felt trapped, like there was no way out. The walls seemed to close in around her, and every sound in the house now felt amplified. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind outside, felt like a warning. Her thoughts returned to her father's warning. The danger was real. But who were these people who wanted to hurt her? And why? What had she done to deserve this? It felt like the whole world had flipped upside down in the span of a few days. From the first strange man at the wedding to the unexpected reappearance of her father, every moment felt like a step further into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. But this wasn't a dream. This was her life. She needed answers. It was late now, and Sarah knew she couldn't stay in the house much longer. Not with the threats piling up, not with the sense of impending doom hanging in the air. She thought of Tom. He had been with her through all of this, and though he didn't know the full extent of what was happening, he was someone she could trust. He had to be. With determination, Sarah grabbed her phone again, dialing his number. Tom answered after the first ring. "Sarah, where are you? You haven't been answering your texts." "I'm at home, but I can't stay here," she said, her voice urgent. "You need to come over. We need to talk." "Okay, I'll be there in 10 minutes, Tom replied, concern lacing his voice. Sarah hung up, feeling a wave of relief. She wasn't alone in this. But even that comfort was fleeting. The truth, whatever it was closing in on her, and the answers she so desperately needed felt just out of reach. As she paced the living room, the silence pressed in around her. Her thoughts began to unravel again, each question leading to more questions. She kept thinking about her father's cryptic words, his insistence that she needed to leave. But leave where? And why? It didn't make sense. None of it did. She glanced out the window, looking for any sign of movement outside. It was dark, the streetlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The knock at the door startled her, breaking her from her trance. It was sharp, urgent, and too precise to be a coincidence. Her heart skipped a beat, and she rushed to the door, praying it was Tom. She opened the door, but there was no one there. Just a small package, sitting on the doorstep. Sarah bent down, cautiously picking it up. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address or markings. The only thing that stood out was the strange symbol etched into the paper. It was unfamiliar, but somehow it felt significant. Her pulse quickened as she carried the package inside, unsure of what to expect. She carefully unwrapped it, revealing a small, ornate box made of polished wood. There was no note inside, nothing to explain its presence. Only the box. But as she held it in her hands, something about it felt wrong. She turned the box over, and her breath caught in her throat. On the bottom, there was another symbol, this one matching the one on the package. It was a circle with lines radiating outward, almost like the sun. Her fingers trembled as she traced the lines. What was it? And why had someone left this for her? The sound of a car pulling up outside snapped her from her thoughts. It was Tom. He was here. Sarah rushed to the door, but before she could open it, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. Someone was out there. Someone she didn't expect. Her heart raced again, but she forced herself to calm down. This was Tom. It had to be. She opened the door, but it wasn't Tom. It was him. The man from the wedding. The one who had been following her, lurking in the shadows. His eyes locked onto hers, and Sarah froze. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice cold and smooth, like the hiss of a snake. She took a step back, instinctively, putting distance between them. "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know who you are, but I need you to leave." The man ignored her, his gaze flicking to the package in her hands. His lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a friendly one. It was the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. "Is that what you're looking for?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "The box?" Sarah gripped it tighter, her fingers white with tension. "What do you know about it?" He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Everything. I know exactly what you're looking for, Sarah. And I know what you've forgotten." She swallowed, the words feeling like a punch in the gut. "Forgotten?" What was he talking about? "I'm not here to hurt you," he continued, his tone almost sympathetic. "But you need to understand something. You're not the only one who's been searching. There are others. People who have been looking for this, for you, for a long time." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sarah tried to process his words. Her mind was racing, and for a moment, it felt like the walls were closing in around her again. She had so many questions, but no answers. And now, this man, this stranger, was making her feel like she was part of something much bigger than she could comprehend. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "What I want doesn't matter. It's what's coming that you need to worry about." Before Sarah could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night just as quickly as he had come. She stood there, shaken and confused, the box still clutched tightly in her hands. What was going on? Who were these people? And why were they after her? Her phone buzzed again, this time with an alert from an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. "The game has begun. You have no choice but to play." Fear clawed at her throat, and she dropped the phone onto the floor. She couldn't run anymore. She couldn't hide. Whatever was happening, it was happening now. The clock was ticking, and Sarah had no idea what her next move should be. Sarah's mind raced as she stood there, staring at the cryptic message on her phone. "The game has begun. You have no choice but to play." Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone, clutching it tightly to her chest. Her heart thudded against her ribcage like a relentless drumbeat. She had no idea what was happening. What game? Who was behind this? Was it connected to the strange man she'd just seen, the one who had left her with more questions than answers? It was too much to process. The unease she'd felt for days was now a full-blown storm in her mind, a whirlwind of confusion and dread. Just then, the sound of footsteps reached her ears, faint but unmistakable. She wasn't alone. Sarah's pulse quickened. The house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind outside, felt amplified. The walls seemed to close in on her. She turned toward the door, but then, nothing. No knock. No sound. Nothing but a suffocating silence. She glanced down at the package on the counter, the box with the strange symbol etched into it. Her fingers hovered over it, but she hesitated. Something about it felt too important, too dangerous to ignore. She had to know what it meant. As she reached for it, the door to the living room swung open behind her. "Sarah?" She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Tom stood there, his face pale with concern. He had always been her rock, the one person she could trust, but the look on his face now made her doubt everything. "You're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But how?" "I came as fast as I could," Tom said, walking toward her. His eyes darted around the room, noticing the tension in her posture, the way she clutched the box in her hands. "Sarah, what's going on? What is all of this?" She shook her head, not sure where to begin. How could she explain what was happening when she didn't fully understand it herself? Tom, I don't know who to trust anymore, she admitted, her voice shaking. There's a game. A game that's started. And I'm the one they're after. Tom's brow furrowed. Who is they? What do you mean, a game? She glanced at the phone, then back at the box. She knew that everything, the texts, the mysterious figure, the symbols, was all connected. But how? She needed answers, and the only way to find them was to keep moving forward, to keep playing. They've been watching me, she said, her voice trembling. There's more to this than I can explain. But I have to figure it out. I have to finish it. Sarah, Tom said, stepping closer to her. You're scaring me. What do you mean, finish it? The truth hung in the air, thick with the weight of the past few days. Sarah couldn't hide it anymore. She had to tell him everything. I think this is connected to my father, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The message, the people who've been following me, they're all part of something he was involved in. Something he never told me about. Tom's eyes widened. What do you mean? Your father? What is this thing you're talking about? She looked down at the box in her hands again, the weight of it heavy. Her mind raced back to the cryptic conversations she'd had with her father before he'd disappeared, the way he'd warned her about dangers she didn't understand. He'd known. He'd known something, and now, it was all falling into place. My father was part of something bigger, Sarah said, her voice growing more confident. And now they want me to finish what he started. Tom stepped back, shock and disbelief crossing his face. You're telling me that your father was involved in some kind of, I don't know, secret organization? And now they want you to carry it on? Sarah nodded slowly, her mind already processing the implications. The puzzle pieces were finally starting to come together, but there was still one thing she couldn't figure out. What was the game they kept referring to? Before she could speak again, her phone buzzed, startling them both. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the screen. A new message had arrived. It's time to make your choice. One decision can change everything. Tom leaned over her shoulder, peering at the screen. What does that mean? A choice? I don't know, Sarah said, her voice tight with anxiety. But it's like they're watching every move I make. Without another word, she turned toward the window. The streets outside were empty, but she knew she couldn't stay here. Not anymore. Not with the clock ticking down, with the game getting closer. We need to go, Sarah said, her voice firm. We need to find out who's behind this. Tom hesitated, but then nodded. Okay. I'll do whatever it takes to help you. Let's get to the bottom of this. Together, they gathered their things, preparing to leave. But as they reached the door, Sarah froze. A shadow moved across the floor outside. Her heart raced. She wasn't alone. Who is it? She whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Stay here, Tom said, his voice low. I'll check it out. He opened the door slowly, peering into the darkness outside. But before he could take another step, something caught his eye. A car, parked across the street, its headlights off but its engine running. Sarah's stomach dropped. Tom, something's wrong. We need to get out of here. But before they could move, the door behind them creaked open. Sarah spun around, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was the man from the wedding. The one who had been watching her. Looking for something? He asked, his cold smile sending a shiver down her spine. Sarah's heart raced, panic rising in her chest. Who are you? What do you want? I told you before, he said, stepping closer. I'm not here to hurt you. But you have to understand, this is bigger than you. And there's nothing you can do to stop it now. Tom stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. Stay away from her. The man's smile only widened. It's too late for that. You've already been drawn into this. Now, you must finish what's been started. Before Sarah could react, the man turned and walked out of the door, disappearing into the night. She was left standing there, her mind a whirl of questions. But now, one thing was clear, whatever had been set in motion wasn't over. It had only just begun. Sarah picked up the box, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier than before. This wasn't just about her father's secrets anymore. It was about her, her future, her choices. And there was only one thing left to do. She had to finish the game.